Hi everyone, welcome back to CSharpCorner live show. I'm your host Stephen Simon, and we are back with another episode of Ask Me Anything show. And guess what? We have reached to episode number 27, and looks like I have been streaming this show all through this pandemic. And guess what? I think this is gonna be the last episode. Yee. So this is gonna be the last episode of this season. After this, we're gonna take a break of maybe a month, and then we will be back with season 2. Ask Me Anything with some amazing content, brand new speakers, and a lot more exciting stuff. But it's not like if this is the last episode of this show, I come in all other shows to that C Sharp Corner. For instance, on every Monday, we have this Azure AI show that we stream at 10 a.m. Eastern. In that show, I am the host and I'm the guest, where we talk about the entire data science ecosystem that Azure has built. We talk about Azure Machine Learning Studio, low code, no code, how you can go ahead and run your custom machine learning models on Azure. So we just talk all about that in that show. Then on Wednesdays, we have a CSharpCorner MVP show where we feature community leaders who take their time and to contribute in the community on CSharpCorner. They may write articles, contribute through forums, chapter leads, and some other ways. Then definitely on Thursdays, we do this Ask Me Anything series. On Friday, we do this growth minded show where we believe that you should be the one coding in your entire life. You should definitely grow in your personal career. So we talk about that in that show. And one of the very exciting show that one of our MVP runs, that is Rocking the Code World with .NET Dave, where he interviews people from .NET background, some of the engineers, program managers, and directors from .NET. Having said that, let's go ahead and talk about today's guest of the show. He's Bob Watt. He works at Microsoft as a principal architect. I'm sorry for that background now. My neighbors are kind of nasty. All right. So and today we're gonna talk about SQL Server Edge. We have seen that how this SQL has grown. I think the SQL was back in 1970s, and even now people are using it. But if you have a SQL skill, what I really love about this Microsoft ecosystem, that if you know one thing, that if you know C Sharp, Microsoft is going to take your skills to a very next level. If you know C Sharp, you can now go ahead and do work on Azure. You can build mobile applications, Blazor. In the same way, if you know SQL and you feel like, hey, you're an old guy, the new database coming in, hold on, Microsoft got your back. He can take all those skills to the Azure. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's show. And so let me go ahead and invite Bob Watt without any further ado. Hi, Bob. Welcome to the live show.
Well, howdy. That's what we say in Texas for hello. And I got to tell you, I'm impressed by that intro. I've never had an intro like that where somebody built a little video of me. I was trying to remember where were those places that I had traveled and presented in those photographs. So thank you, and thanks for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Bob, for taking your time and accepting the invitation to be a part of this live show. Before we go ahead and talk all those technical stuff, right, I would like to ask, how have you been all through this pandemic? You were talking about behind the scenes that you always loved to travel, right? How has things changed for you?
Well, like anybody else, I've had to adjust, adapt, overcome, improvise like any person would in this situation. But as it turns out, even before this situation in the calendar year 2020, I was already doing many virtual presentations, webinars, things, especially for international audiences. So, I was telling you, it's kind of like a 40%, 60% split between, doing that and then traveling and going to an event. But I certainly do miss being at events in person. It's a way to connect to people that's really hard to do online. Mm-hmm. And so obviously, like everyone else, I'm very prayerful and hopeful that there'll be a time soon when we can do that again. But the interesting thing is that I've gotten a lot more requests to do things. I'm busier. far busier than I'd ever been before presenting. It seems like every week I've got several requests from all over the world to come talk about SQL anywhere between the edge and the cloud. So I'm doing well. Thanks for asking, and I hope everybody here in the audience is doing the best they can and adapting and overcoming and improvising as best they can, because that is the way to kind of my motto to live my life, right?
Yeah, that's good. I think we all had to change. We had to move to virtual things, and definitely we are more connected more than ever, I believe. I mean, we have been doing all this virtual thing, but I believe at the same time, Bob, we are very blessed that we have all these resources and this technology with us. That there are many people who have lost their lives, the families are being affected.
Yes.
And so definitely, even if you're everyone who's watching this show now, you are very lucky that you have these resources that you're watching, because we have seen many lives have been affected.
Absolutely.
So having said that, but again, I see your background is very interesting. It says Azure SQL Revealed. What's that, Bob? What's going on
you
there?
mean this right here? Yeah, well, first of all, you're looking at the background of my office here. I'm very blessed to have a office in my home here in Texas. And so, during the pandemic, I literally have been working from here. This is where I work. This is where I do presentations. So you're looking at the background. A lot of people love this background because it contains, it looks like an office, right? But also, I just thought I'd tell you, it contains some interesting history. So right over here, this little binder is a binder of a training manual I was given in 1993 when I joined Microsoft on Sybase. That's because SQL Server has its roots in the Sybase product way back in those days, right? So I was cleaning out my office over the last year before pandemic and so forth, and I found this manual. We used to have things like hardbound manuals back in the day. We had ring binders and so forth, right? But also what you see right here are 3 books that I have written over the last 3 years, including this one right here, Azure SQL Reveal. So if you don't mind, I'll just tell you real quickly about the 3 books, because it talks about the journey, and it really applies to SQL Edge to cloud. So in 2018, I launched a book called SQL Server on Linux. And the reason I did that was I didn't see a lot of people talking about that. We had just launched it, the year before. And interesting enough, I have a Linux background before I joined Microsoft. So before I joined Microsoft out of college, I was a Unix. We called it Unix back then, by the way. We didn't call it Linux. I was a Unix C++ programmer working on database systems like Ingress, Oracle, and even Sybase. And so when I joined Microsoft, I switched to this Windows gear, which I was not used to. But in those days, I thought that book was neat, and I loved it because I got back to my roots of Linux, of using Bash shell and all those kind of type things, right? So I wrote the book on Linux, and that's part of our offering that's really interesting that customers still even today don't even know that SQL works on Linux. And then last year, you may have seen, we launched our latest version of SQL Server called SQL Server 2019. And I was actually part of the team, at the engineering team, from the very beginning when that project started. So I was able to literally write a book from the perspective of what was it like to be part of a team from beginning to end to ship a product. It was fun. And so the first chapter is all about that journey, the history of how we built it, right? And then it talked about all the great functionality that exists in SQL 19. And then in December of last year, I was talking to my boss, my manager, about how to do things maybe a little different on our team. Where do we need some help in getting the word out about what we do as SQL Server? And so we agreed that I would spend some time on Azure SQL. And then what better way to learn and promote that message than write a book? And so Azure SQL Reveal just launched here a few weeks ago. And that's the latest book. And that book really is interesting because, again, I love telling history stories. So the first chapter is literally the history of Azure SQL. I went back and interviewed the original team members of the Azure SQL project and asked them, what was it like back then? I even interviewed a vice president from Microsoft that has left the company that was the vice president of SQL at the time. What was it like then? Like, why did you do it, right? So we talk about the journey of the history, evolution of Azure and Azure SQL. And then the book is a really detailed analysis and reference and examples for somebody that has some SQL skills, but they're just not sure how to apply that to the cloud. So got a lot of great reviews from the book, and I'm excited to see people take a look at it, read it, and see how it will help them, especially if they are living in that world right now where I need to spend some time in SQL, but I got to spend some time in the cloud, and how do I translate skills between that.
Yeah, and I think that book looks very interesting. So what we're gonna do for all people who are watching after the show ends, or maybe if I get doing this time, I'll grab a link and I'll put it into the comments. So if anyone's willing to just go ahead and have a look at the book, so
sure, that'd be great.
Yeah. So again, before we still go ahead and do this is Ask Me Anything series, right? So
yeah, of course, ask me anything.
Right. So when you said, Bob, that when was that manual? 1993.
Yeah. So this manual, I was given that manual in October of 1993. That's when I started with the company at Microsoft.
So October, right? You remember that? I wonder you remember the date.
I know. Well, it's weird, right? I mean, I know that it's 27 years ago, and how do you remember the date? But here's another way I remember it. My older son, Troy, is the same age as literally the same age as my career at Microsoft. So that's an easy way for me to remember. He was born in August of 1993. And it is one of the reasons I moved to Microsoft, because I was working at companies in the United States where I was traveling a lot. I know it sounds funny because I told you I travel a lot now, but I wanted to go find a company where I didn't have to travel any, because I was just having a son that was just born, right? I wanted to be there with him. And so that was great, because Microsoft offered me a job in their support organization where I didn't travel any. I was just helping people solve problems with SQL Server. And one of the things that Microsoft said to me, and by the way, we didn't have anybody in Texas, so I had to fly to Seattle to interview, for Microsoft. And one of the things that they said that I attracted to them was the fact that I was a developer. Like, I was a coder. They were like, hey, Bob, here's the source code of SQL Server. When you solve problems with customers, you can go look at the source code if you want to debug a problem, to look at that. And very early on, I got that reputation with our own product team that I could go look at the code that they wrote and tell them, hey, I don't think that's right. I mean, this is why this is broken. Sometimes they didn't like that, actually, but they appreciated it, right? Because I could talk their language. So I knew database systems, I knew Oracle, I knew Sybase, I knew Ingress. And so I just quickly learned Microsoft SQL Server and then applied that to looking at the source code. And so very early on, I loved it, because it was kind of cool to get the opportunity to have access to the source code of a product that a company produced. I was writing my own code in those days. So I enjoyed it, because I was getting to see the internals, which kind of led to a reputation I started getting in the industry of presenting on the internals of how our product worked. And I was blessed to be able to look at the code to translate code into presentations about how things work. So
Bob, when you say you got it manual in October 1993, and when I look at this topic of today, it's SQL Server Edge to cloud. And SQL is pretty old, but you guys have done a great job to put it on the cloud and all those new stuff. And when you say you have been a part of this organization that has seen 3 different CEOs, I mean, not many people would have seen it, right? You have seen 3 different CEOs at Microsoft. So to be very frank, Microsoft has seen a phase from a not so good company to now being one of the most trustworthy cloud providers, and a very more like a developer centric. How do you think Microsoft has changed through all this time and become a more very trustworthy a provider or company?
Yeah, I won't brand the trustworthy part of it, because I've worked for the company, and I quite frankly think it's one of the greatest companies I've ever worked for in my entire career. And I've worked for several companies, right? And I'm a very customer-driven person, because that's been my job at Microsoft for many years. So me just looking at the evolution of the company, if you think about it, we were starting out really at a very, this is Windows, right? That's what we do. It's a Windows company. It's an Office company. But in those early days, if you remember, we really tried to attract developers a lot. We were really going after that developer space. Even Steve Ballmer, one of his biggest mantras was developers, developers, develop. He wanted to go after that developer community. So I thought for a long period of time, Microsoft did a pretty good job of trying to attract developers towards products that we were building. And quite frankly, Windows NT was a big part of that. We wanted to attract developers, right? But we needed developers to write apps in the enterprise space to be credible to the industry. It's one thing just to be a departmental database. In fact, I'll show this to you. I have these still right here. These are the diskettes.
Oh my goodness.
Right here. These diskettes are what I was given in 1993 to install SQL Server on OS 2. Yes, Stephen, you don't have no idea what I'm talking about.
No.
Yeah. But can you imagine this SQL Server exists. This is it. This is the product right here. Just how much you just get, right? So we wanted to gain credibility from this to enterprise. And so, but we need developers to be part of that. You have to write apps, right? I mean, you can go out and just build great operating systems and databases all day long, but who's going to use it unless you have an app for it, right? So we're trying to attract developers. We're trying to get enterprise worthy. So that, we have that journey in the 2000s where we're doing all of that thing. And then it's interesting. I wrote this in the Azure book, by the way. We made a decision back in the 2000s timeframe. I don't remember the exact date. We made a decision to hire a gentleman that was running the Dynamics division to run what we call Server Tools and Business. Server Tools and Business was our enterprise part of our business, right? But it included the developer part as well. And you may have heard of it. His name is Satya Nadella. We said, hey, Satya Nadella, you come run the Server Tools and Enterprise business for us, right? And he is the one. We had already started the Azure journey, by the way, at that time. So, but he is the one that really started pushing the cloud hard. He's like, look, man, we really need to make this a huge part of our strategy. And he's also the person that embraced other things like Linux, like Macs, Mac OS. I mean, like he was like, look, we need to be everywhere out there. We're not just going to be a Windows company. And by the way, that's a little around the time frame we rebranded Azure to Microsoft Azure. It used to be called Windows Azure. So I think it's the one thing Satya brought that was just truly amazing is that Microsoft will be a company that will appeal to developers anywhere they want it to be. And quite frankly, that's what eventually led to him approving. We had to get his approval to launch SQL on Linux because during my career, we had talked about doing SQL on Linux. I know this sounds crazy, but I remember even back in the mid 2000s talking about that topic. Could we do SQL on Linux? Does it a thing? And I just, the leadership of the company thought it wasn't the right strategy at the time. But I really give credit to Satya for making big, bold decisions to say, hey, in Azure, we're going to embrace Linux in Azure. And we're going to allow virtual machines with Linux to be first-class citizens in this ecosystem, right? I remember one of the first decisions he made, this is more of a user thing, is he opened up Office to iPad. Like Office, I had friends of mine that have iPads, and they couldn't run Office on there. And they're like, what's going on? Why can't we do Office on here? Because Office was available for like MacBooks. And one of the first decisions I saw Satya make as a CEO was like, you know what? That's crazy. Office can be a great app for iPads. And he did that. And I again, laud him for, like you talked about, embracing Azure, embracing the cloud, and really using that server tools and business. By the way, that organization is called Cloud and Enterprise today. And Scott Guthrie runs what Satya used to run. Because what happened was, of course, when we needed a new CEO for the company, the board chose Satya from the Server and Tools and Business Vice President to become our CEO. So now Scott runs effectively what Satya used to run, although it's gotten bigger, obviously. So we used to be called Server Tools and Business. Now it's called Cloud and Enterprise. But Satya had such bold opinions about how we need to embrace so many different things, and it goes with the mission of the company to empower everybody in the planet to do more, right? And it's not just about Windows anymore. Although Windows is a huge part of our strategy still. I love running Windows on my laptop, quite frankly. But you see me all the time. I run SQL on Linux, containers. Containers is a big part of our strategy. We'll talk about that. But yeah, Satya, no doubt I've seen that evolution. And I think Satya has emboldened the trustworthiness of a lot of people. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that he embraces pretty much, where do you want to go run stuff? We'll host it or we'll help you make it successful. Open source, another thing that he helped embolden, right? Think about the people we've hired at Microsoft. I don't know if you saw recently, the founder of Python now works for us.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. People don't know this, but one of the founders of Kubernetes, Brendan Burns, who from Google, we hired him to work at Microsoft. And when I talked to Brendan about that, one of the things he told me was, he said, I'll come work for you guys, but you got to give me people to contribute to the open source Kubernetes project. And we did it. We said, sure, of course. And so I suspect the same thing will happen with Python.
Yeah, I mean, what an interesting journey Microsoft has been under the Satya leadership. I was very fortunate to meet him back in 2014
Nice.
when he visited India for the very first time after becoming CEO. I was a Microsoft partner, so I was pretty lucky enough to meet him. So yeah, Microsoft loves openness now, I know. And I think when you go ahead and talk about open source, so Microsoft now also has GitHub, right?
Exactly.
It's GitHub. And I don't think any other cloud service provider can go ahead and even think about doing that, because how Microsoft has been more like a developer centric. So that's really amazing. And let's go ahead and quickly talk about now. Let's get to our topic of the day today. That
Sure.
SQL Server Edge to cloud. I mean, as you said, right, that Microsoft is like, hey, where do you want? We're gonna host it, right? So I think
Right.
that goes with today. You want to run SQL, where you want to run, we're gonna allow it to you. If you want to run it on today, I have it. If you want to run it on Raspberry Pi,
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So hey, Stephen, what I've got like a slide that kind of summarizes this thing. You want me to show that to you?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, let's do that. Let's do that. Let's do it. Let me bring this over here. Let me share my screen. Let me share this screen. And you let me know if you can see that okay.
I can see that. It says Azure SQL Reveal.
How about that?
Oh.
Okay. Can you see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay, so let me make sure I can still see you. I'll bring the StreamYard up on my other monitor so I can see you okay. All right, so again, think about what I talked about diskettes, right? So the journey for SQL for so many years was Windows NT, departmental servers, small servers, then enterprise servers, like it's all server thing, right? And what we made a decision is a few years back is we felt that the SQL Server engine could be an engine that could power many different scenarios in IoT scenarios. So we embarked on a journey we announced this year called Azure SQL Edge. And here's the thinking. We found from developers for IoT applications that there's a lot of data to process in the IoT space on a device, right? And so your choices are to stream a lot of data from these devices to some hub or even directly to the cloud and then process it. The problem is that what if these devices are semi-connected, right? Think about a mining company that's out in the wilderness somewhere. And it's not like these people in these wilderness areas are directly connected to the internet 24 hours a day. And even if they are, they don't really have maybe the greatest connectivity, so they can't stream this information like all the time. So what do you do then? Well, we embarked on a journey of taking the SQL engine and reducing the footprint to a very, very small size, like less than 500 megabytes for the engine itself, the code. But we're able to retain most of the functionality for the engine itself. And so we said, well, we think since we already know how to run SQL Server in a container, why don't we actually deploy SQL in this small footprint in a container, allow somebody to deploy that container on an IoT device. We'll bundle it with things like Kafka for streaming purposes. We'll also put into the SQL engine, into that engine that runs on the edge, the ability to natively take that streaming and then do analytics on the streaming in the engine real time, on the device. And then, we had this thing called SQL Machine Learning Services we announced with SQL 16 and 17. So we already knew how to do R and Python machine learning models. We'll allow somebody to go train a model, put the model on the device, and then go do machine learning directly on the IoT device. So therefore, what you're sending from the device to, say, a hub or the cloud is processed data. Or if you're disconnected, you literally could go connect your device, download everything you need, and then go do predictive analytics on the device without being connected. I mean, Buck Woody, my friend, I love his scenario. He talks about a refrigeration truck, a truck that carries goods that needs to be refrigerated. And one of the key parts of this truck is that it must have a battery that is viable to keep the refrigeration going. And so companies may, with these refrigeration, have IoT devices to help them do sensors to decide, how's this thing running? Is the refrigeration running correctly? Is the truck running properly to keep the goods correct? The problem is that for like the battery, they may have to change out these batteries on a fixed cycle when the battery doesn't really even need to be changed because they can't predict when it should be changed. They can't afford it to go out. So what if we could actually take the SQL engine, take data that's streaming into this truck through the sensors to decide about battery replacement, put a machine learning model into the truck, and then even though it's not even connected to the internet, there could be a sensor given to the driver to say, hey, this battery's got to get replaced because there's an issue, potential issue. So you predict before it goes out to ensure that your trucking line runs smoothly. So that's Azure SQL Edge. It's versionless SQL Server because We don't have a specific version. We keep it continuously updated for you. You pull updates that we deploy. And again, you've got built-in streaming with Kafka. You've got an integration with Kafka in the engine itself. You've got streaming analytic queries you can run against your stream. And then you can run machine learning models against that. And it is just SQL Server. So you can literally connect to this thing with Management Studio or your favorite tool. And you can run column store indexes or other queries that you need to run against the SQL engine. So that's the IoT SQL Edge offering that we announced here this year. It's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah. Bob, a quick question. I mean, for guys who are just watching in and they do have an IoT background and they've been using Azure for their services, we do know that Azure provides a service that's called Azure IoT Hub, right? Yeah. So how does this thing differ from this Azure IoT Hub? Because I know Azure IoT Hub is used for communication purpose. You can exchange data. How is it different than that service?
It's not different. It integrates with it. So okay. you have the choice on an IoT device to just stream your data as a developer directly to a hub if you want to, right? You can do that. This gives you the ability for semi-connected and disconnected scenarios to do processing on the device and then stream results of that processing to the hub. So imagine in this scenario I was talking about that what I'd like to do is take the predictive analysis and stream that result to the IoT hub. And then I've got reporting and analytics going on in the cloud that's telling me how well is that working across all my fleet. So again, you still can stream directly at IoT Hub, or you can take Azure SQL Edge and think about you running SQL queries against this and taking the results of that and streaming it to IoT Hub. That's all an integrated play that we've got built in.
That sounds pretty cool.
It is very cool. And that's what customers were telling us. They were like, hey, I love the IoT Hub. I love the IoT technology. But just a raw stream of sensor data or telemetry data isn't going to work for me all the time. Isn't there a way to offload processing? Think about this as kind of being a smart IoT device where we can take the power of SQL Server at a very small footprint as a container and allow you to do processing directly on the device itself without even being connected to the cloud if necessary.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. That I think instead of just sending the data to the cloud and maybe just storing it and not making any sense out of it, what you are doing is we're not only sending the data, we are processing it, we are making the alerts and all those things happening, and we are generating the insights from the data, right? And I think you did mention you have the stream analysis where you can do this thing on the real time, right?
Correct.
So that's
pretty cool. Think of people have seen like Azure Stream Analytics. Think about that kind of type scenario, Azure Stream Analytics. Think about being able to do that kind of processing directly on the device itself through SQL Server. And here's the thing, if you're a developer that understands T-SQL, it all just works with T-SQL. Everything does.
All right, so it looks like this space needs to be a lot more explored, and I think this is humongous. You guys have integrated all the good things coming from different products and you've added it in one package.
That's right. That's right. Now, if you think about the journey that we're doing, and you think about what I'll call the word on-premises, because even though this is Azure SQL Edge, the SQL engine runs on devices, not in the cloud, of course. It talks to the cloud, but it runs on wherever you need it, right? And then if you think of this journey, you think next of SQL 19 and SQL Server on Linux. Think of those two things. Those are typically running, they don't have to, but they're running typically in your data center as a developer, as administrator. So SQL 19 being a huge release for us last year. And one of the things we released with SQL 19 that was groundbreaking was Spark integration with SQL in a big data cluster. So now all of a sudden you could deploy SQL Server in a Kubernetes environment, and then you could run native Spark integrated with SQL Server together with Hadoop in this one cluster. Along with that was this concept called Polybase, where you could then against SQL Server run queries and let the data stays where it lives, whether it's Hadoop, Oracle, MongoDB, Teradata, other SQL servers, Azure. So SQL could become a data hub for you to run your queries. And so this Spark integration with SQL 19 was a really big thing for us launching that last year. And the really nice thing, if you look to the right-hand side over here, it lines up with SQL Server on Linux, because it turns out this big data cluster is deployed as a series of Linux containers in a Kubernetes cluster. So all of a sudden now the rich integration with SQL Server, with Linux, with containers, we embrace that 100%. We launched SQL Server on Linux in 2017, But now we're taking SQL Server on Linux and doing it in a new way that's people aren't used to. So this is really groundbreaking. We did other things in SQL 19, like we improved the query processor engine. So as a developer, all of a sudden now you can take advantage of faster performance and not change your code. We took common query patterns that developers struggled with to do. They would have to do really intense query debugging on to figure out how to solve the problem. And then they would have to go in and make changes to their code to make it run faster. We were like, hey, we don't want you to do that anymore. We would love for you to be able to move to this version of SQL. And then now all these different query patterns you've built would just become faster. Do you want to see an example of that?
That would be great.
Okay, let's do that. So, and it also shows a tool. Now, maybe you've had some people on your show this tool before, Azure Data Studio.
Oh my goodness. I was blown away, Bob. You know, I come from a Python background and I've been using this Jupyter notebooks. I don't know when you guys did it, but this is fantastic. This is great.
It's crazy. It's because this has been out for over a year, this SQL notebook idea, right? So one good thing for your audience here, they may be wondering, like, where am I going to get all this stuff Bob's showing? I'll bring up a slide, remind me at the very end, I'll bring up a slide that shows you where you can download any of this stuff. Like what I'm showing you right here is actually available in a free GitHub repo. Anything right here I'm showing on the left-hand side, this is all just free, where you can just run all this stuff anytime you want. And so this is a SQL notebook showing a common pattern for developers called table variables. So you might build a stored procedure here like this. And here's what I love about notebooks. You get to save the results in the notebook. You've seen that before from Jupyter notebooks, right? Yeah. So for SQL, it's the same way. So I literally am not even going to run this. This is offline. I'm just taking this notebook and I'm showing it to you as it's stored from it's in the GitHub repo itself. So this stored procedure will run a query against this table variable. And the problem is, prior to SQL 19, we would assume that there's only one row in this table variable. This is the assumption of the query processor. Well, that's bad if there's like 300,000 rows. You may not get a plan in SQL Server that's optimal. As a developer, you're frustrated because like, look, man, it's not my fault you did that. Make this run faster. So I show here in the notebook that if you run this like in a loop, like 25 times, here's the example. This is going to take like, if you see here, this is going to take like 21 seconds to run. Now, is that bad? Well, yeah, this should run a lot faster in the environment I have, especially if all this data is small and in memory. So along in SQL 19 is you as the ability, I'll just scroll through the results here down to the bottom. You can come in now, and here's what you do. All you do is change the database compat level to 150, which is the latest compat level. So you could upgrade to SQL 19, keep your compat level for your old version of SQL, get comfortable with that, move to the latest compat level, run the same query here, and you remember what the time was before, right? 25 seconds? Mm-hmm. Now it's 8 seconds. And I didn't do anything. I just ran the code with a new compat level. I just changed the configuration option, and now I'm just tons faster. Very simple example of us, and this isn't like a feature, right? This isn't like an add-on. This just comes with SQL Server. And since it's part of the SQL Server engine, it is SQL Edge to Cloud. Everywhere SQL runs, Edge to Cloud gets this core type functionality. That's why I wanted to show you this example here, because anywhere I talk about what SQL is doing, you get something like this. Whether it's an Azure, Edge, Linux, containers, Windows, wherever, this is something we provide. This is just one example of what we're doing to help make performance better for developers without you worrying about changing the code. A smarter query processor, basically.
Yeah. So there's one very, very generic question coming from the audience. I know it's going to be very tough for you to answer. The toughest question you often see is, Bob, there it goes. How do we improve the performance of a SQL Azure database?
Yeah, that's not a tough question. Of course, it always depends on what the current performance looks like. I'm going to show you a resource, Deepak, before we're done for GitHub workshop, GitHub YouTube videos, Microsoft Learn content, where Anna Thompson and I do a complete workshop in Azure SQL. And one of the modules is on performance. Mm-hmm. And that's the one I owned. I did the whole thing. Anna kind of interviews me as part of this whole thing because I spent a lot of time in this space. And I show you in this module all the tools, all the monitoring tools, all the capabilities. How do you scale in Azure? What does it look like in SQL? What does it look like in Azure? Deepak, one thing you should know is the example I just showed you, that works in Azure out of the gate. In fact, we shipped that functionality called intelligent query processing first in Azure and then brought it to SQL Server 2019. So the way to improve performance in Azure SQL Database is to first get a baseline of where you are. And in that module, Deepak, I talk about how do you approach a performance problem in Azure SQL, how do you break it down, and how do you use the various tools to go figure out where to get better performance. So I've got a complete, and in fact, what's cool in Microsoft Learn is there's a complete module where we give you, check this out, we give you a free Azure SQL Database sandbox for you to do this.
Oh, yeah.
So no charge. Like you have to have an Azure subscription, but if you're worried about paying for how to go try this out, it's free from Microsoft Learn.
Yeah, definitely, Bob. I love that platform, but to be honest, I really miss Microsoft Virtual Academy, right?
Yeah.
Now you think
I remember that. I remember Virtual Academy.
Right. So, but I love this new concept of Microsoft Learn, where they've added videos. There's also content, but and the right hand side you get a sandbox, a temporary subscription where of an Azure, you can go in and then run it, and with every other exercise, you can go ahead and practice it at the same time. So that's a pretty cool thing from MVA to Microsoft Learn.
I mean, what happened is that if you think about SQL Server, we have Developer Edition, right? Which is free. So you can take Developer Edition, put it on your laptop, and you can try anything you want to go play around with the tools. You can play around with the notebooks I just showed you, and you don't have to pay any money. But how do you do that for Azure? So because it's a subscription-based service. Now we have programs through MSDN or Azure free trials, but those are limited. I mean, you just get a certain amount. For this Microsoft Learn Sandbox, you go into our Azure SQL Fundamentals training. You can go directly to the performance module, go through all the stuff I'm talking about here, and even more depth. And then you just get a free Azure SQL database to go play around and try it all out. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and when you say that, it reminds me of the fact that until December 30th this month, by the end of this month, they have a discount of certification that's done from maybe like $45 to $15 if you come from a place because of this COVID-affected 19. So you want to do that course on Azure Fundamentals and then take this certification, which is only $15, and I think it will be worth. You want to make the best out of it this Christmas.
We've had people tell us that they've been able to go through they've gone through the Azure SQL Fundamentals training on Microsoft Learn. They just went from end to end, right? And it's all modular, so you can do it in pieces. You have to do it all at one time, and you do that. And we've had people said they've gone through that, and it was enough for them to get the certification.
Yeah, that's great, and I just love the approach of hand in hand. You learn and you do at the same time, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, I love that approach.
So think about this top level here, right? Edge, SQL 19 with things like Spark, SQL on Linux in a container, Kubernetes, Linux, wherever you want to do. So I think this top area is more typically on premises, right? It's not in a public cloud you're running this, although on the right-hand side, I'll show you in a second, you can do that. This is more SQL Server, common engine though, running across these. Now you got to start talking about the cloud. And I think Anna came onto your show and showed and talked about these three things right here. But let's just kind of refresh everybody's memory. SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine is a complete control for you over the guest operating system, right? You want a specific version of SQL, like it could be SQL 19. You want SQL on Linux. You want a SQL container. You own everything inside the OS. Microsoft will host the infrastructure, host your VM, but you manage the virtual machine because you have complete control of everything you want to do, right? And it's very popular. It's an easier lift and shift for customers that are used to SQL Server on their environment because it's just SQL Server. When you get inside the VM, it just looks like your own VM running VMware or Hyper-V, right? So that's very popular. Although what we've done there, in addition though, is we've provided some extra services outside of SQL to help you do like backups, security updates, things of that nature. Now, you look in the middle here for Azure SQL Managed Instance, this is like taking a complete SQL instance with system databases, SQL agent, service broker, replication, and you just go run that. But we're going to provide a platform for you to do it. So you don't worry about the operating system anymore. You don't even care what we're doing. You don't worry about physical file placement, but you get a complete SQL instance. So it feels like SQL Server to you, kind of, the whole package. It feels like a SQL 19 thing that you're using. But like, for example, we will automate backups and high availability and disaster recovery. We'll just put all that together for you and give you a service level agreement on top of it. So very popular, again, for an existing SQL Server customer, and especially developers that are counting on a complete SQL experience, right? So if they don't want if they don't want to manage the VM, but they want the complete SQL experience, I'll go there. Now, Azure Database is interesting because Azure Database it's still a SQL experience, but we're gonna take away from you on purpose worrying about the instance now. We're just gonna say, focus on a database. We'll worry about the instance for you behind the scenes. We'll manage all that kind of stuff. We'll manage the operating system, the virtual machine, the instance of SQL Server. Just focus on your database and run your app against that. So a lot of new developers that come to SQL love this option because they don't even want a DBA anymore, right? They just want to be a developer and go run SQL against the database. In fact, I mean, I'm not going to say that Microsoft's your DBA, but we've tried to automate behind the scenes so much stuff to help you not worry about any of those things. It also opens up new possibilities like elastic pools. You're a developer that has to go manage 1,000 databases. How do you do that? How do you pay for that? So pools help you do it. But it also opens up two interesting options that Anna probably talked about called serverless and hyperscale. Serverless is very popular for new developers. You don't worry anymore about scale. We auto scale for you. You just say, look, I think I need between 2 and 16 cores to run this app. I have no idea how much I really need, but I'd only like to pay for what I use. Then you say, well, you know what? I don't even use this database all the time. Like between 2 and 6 a.m., nobody even touches it. Why would I have to pay for it then? So we can have your database paused and you don't pay for compute time during that cycle. Hyperscale being one where like, I need 100 terabyte database. Like, how do I get that as a developer? And I need you, Microsoft, to worry about sizing and storage. And I need read scale. I need a lot of read scale. I need to be able to scale out my reads. That's kind of like that hyperscale option. So Azure Database has some of those unique characteristics, but it's still SQL Server behind the scenes. So like, for example, the demo I just showed you with the notebook runs against all three of these just the same way. I can take that same notebook and just point it against any of these three things, and I'm going to get the same results. Intelligent query processing in the engine works the same across all three of these. So this at the bottom here represents Azure, what is going on in the public cloud for SQL.
That's fantastic, Bob. And when I look at from left to right, I see initially I have more control on my services, on my database. And as I go towards the right, it's more like an Azure doing it for me. So can you help us go ahead and divide it into IaaS and SaaS on what falls in IaaS and what falls in SaaS, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. So right over here on this left-hand side, this is completely IaaS, infrastructure as a service. And what that means, of course, is that the infrastructure, which means the hardware, the racks, the servers, the hosts, the networking, the storage, we'll manage that for you. You just use it. And inside the operating system itself, the guest, you manage all of that. You have complete control over that. You can put whatever you want in there. In fact, a very popular option for some of our customers is to use their SQL Server licenses that they purchased and apply that here. So they can actually do that with Azure. They can apply their licenses to SQL Server inside this virtual machine, and they can run any SQL Server that's supported that they want to. Could be Linux, could be Windows, whatever you want to do. The two on the right are platform as a service. Even though this is a SQL instance, no, you don't worry about the virtual machine anymore. All you worry about is an instance of SQL Server. In fact, when you deploy it, you say, hey, I just want a SQL Server. Can you give it to me? We'll deploy it for you. Then you start interacting with this. But you never touch a file system. You don't go to a command prompt on a server anywhere or something. Whereas here, remember, you're still interacting with the virtual machine itself to go do everything. So this is platform as a service because even though it's a SQL instance, when you deploy it, you just say, I want an instance, and we install it for you behind the scenes. Then you will use your common SQL tools and program in your applications and your APIs to interact with this SQL server just like you would with anything else. But here's the beauty of it. We're going to automate all the high availability for you. That's the big beauty of the platform part, right? We're going to automate the deployment, of course, because you don't worry about a VM, but that high availability is huge. For example, right out of the gate, when you get one of these instances, we are already doing automatic backups for you. And it's insane what we do. Imagine a world where what we do is we put the databases separate from the backups, and then we geo-redundant the backups, and we have copies of your databases automatically going around in the system. And that's all there. And then if you want long-term retention, we can do this for years for you, right? Now, in managed instance, you say, I would like really high availability. So you pick the business critical tier. We will build an availability group behind the scenes, which means you have replicas of your data automatically being deployed. And you just declare it. You just say, I want it, and we do it. If you had to do that over here in virtual machine or up here in SQL Server, we have all those capabilities, but you have some configuration and setup and maintenance for yourself. The other benefit of platforms as a service is service level agreements. Because of this built-in capability, we give you promises of how available your application is. And if we miss that, you get money back, basically. It's like, get your money back if we don't meet our promises. We obviously have a huge incentive to do that. And then Azure Database being the furthest on the right, being the most platform as a service, because again, don't worry about the instance, just figure out your database and we will go do everything else behind the scenes to help you manage that. Now, we even offer different things in Azure Database like automatic indexing. Like, well, if you turn it on, we can help you build indexes automatically. So we can add even additional services for you. So if you think left to right, it's IaaS, and then the most PaaS offering would be Azure Database on the right-hand side.
Yeah, Bob, I also see it this way. On left-hand side, it's more like you need a DBA, and as you move towards right-hand side, you don't need a DBA. So your job is at risk, isn't it?
It's funny you mention that, because I don't want DBAs to get the impression that their jobs just like are obsolete in the cloud. Because even for database and managed instance, there still are some things you may need to do for tuning. I always give the example that if you write really bad queries, because T-SQL is a pretty open query language, right? If you write really, really bad queries, you're probably going to get some bad performance. So what we do in Azure Database, so for example, is we try to help ease the burden of indexing, which can improve your performance, right? But if you go out there and you build a database of 10 terabytes, and then you do a select star from 10 terabytes, you're going to have not good performance, right? So some of the core performance skills that DBAs are used to today, and they work together with developers, I still think these things apply across any of these assets.
That's great. And moments back, Bob, you did mention about if you have an existing SQL license, you can just bring it to this Azure SQL Server on Azure machines. And I think that Azure was very kind to go ahead and provide some discounts if you already own a SQL license, isn't it?
And you do it also, by the way, with managed instance and database. You have those same options. You can use what's called Azure Hybrid Benefit across all three of these. So you have SQL licenses, you need to now go to Azure, and you don't want to like pay again. Like, why would I do that, right? You can apply those benefits towards any of these options.
That's great. So we will take one question that's coming from our MVPs
Sure.
and internal channels. It says, what operating system do I go ahead and run on Azure SQL Edge?
Thanks for asking that. So right now, Azure SQL Edge is deployed as a Linux container. So it would be a Linux operating system, and that would depend on whatever Linux flavor makes sense for your IoT device. Most of the times, I just demo on Ubuntu. I easily run an Ubuntu. I can take a Raspberry Pi like you just showed, and I've done it before, and I can flash that with Ubuntu, and then I can deploy my SQL container. The SQL container is a Linux container, so it pretty much runs on any Linux operating system you can throw at it.
So do you think, Bob, just now, someone, when you go ahead and talk about containers, Dockers, and all that stuff, you think it's kind of a little, it has something to add learning edge before you go ahead into it? It will require you to go ahead and have good knowledge, then go ahead and get started with this? Because
we try to, for Edge, we try to really help you a lot. If you don't think about containers, we try to make that very easy for you. We really try to make it easy to learn how to deploy a container. So I wouldn't say that you have to have a huge knowledge of how to do containerization to use Azure SQL Edge. I think it benefits you a little bit. For example, one of the cool things about containers is that to update a SQL server with container, you simply replace it with a new container. And we show you how to do those kind of type things. So I wouldn't say that it's 100% required to be an expert on containers, but to be really good as a developer and use containerization, whether it's Kafka or SQL that we deploy here, it helps to know some of the basics. And in fact, if you want to learn some of the basics with SQL Server on containers, my SQL 19 workshop that I showed you, and it's also in that SQL 19 book, has a complete chapter on how to do containers with SQL Server. So it gives you fundamentals on how to get started on it.
Yeah, and there's one comment coming in from me. He says, Azure is paid, so it's right to learn something, and I need to pay the usual amount for it. Now, I think we just answered this question, and the different resources. Bob did tell that we have a free trial. We also have this MS Learn platform where you can go in and always use this as you want to go and get started. So
that's correct.
Yeah, just rewind 10 minutes or maybe like 7 to 8 minutes back, and that should help. Do you have anything on this slide? Then else will.
Yeah, I just want to show you a couple of things here. I know this gets really busy, right? You're like, what are all these icons, right? I need to make this prettier. But one of the things that we have learned is that customers can live in this space on their data center, or they can live in the cloud here, but they want hybrid now. Like, how do I get the power of some of the stuff down here at the bottom and put it where I want to run Azure? So we announced these new Azure Arc services just this year in preview, and you're going to see a lot more next calendar year about this. Think now of running Azure SQL, for example, in Kubernetes in your data center as now a managed instance. Imagine us bringing the world of platform as a service down to your data center instead of having for you to run it in the public cloud. And you would set yourselves up in a way where you could be connected or semi-connected, and you could pay for it as a subscription. So we kind of feel this is like our hybrid world. And so we have two things: Azure Arc enabled SQL Server, which is just taking your existing SQL Server as you're running today and allowing you to run some Azure services like Azure Defender for security rights, for security purposes, like threat detections and so forth. And then Azure Arc data services being like, almost feel like a managed instance where we're going to give you that feel of platform as a service, but you don't have to deploy in the Azure public cloud. You can deploy it anywhere you want to deploy it. So that's a big deal. And then these other things I'm showing over here is just showing you the commonality across all of this. T-SQL, Python, R, and of course, I don't show you all the different languages developer used. You pick it. Python, Go, Ruby, C++, C Sharp, whatever you want to do, those languages all apply to all of this. And then security, performance, and availability are core engine features that work identical across all of this. See, that's the beauty of the message of edge to cloud. The common thread for you is, if you think the SQL engine is a database engine that makes your application perform well and shine, it's the same engine code across all of this stuff. That's pretty amazing. Think about going from this diskette model. That's why I wanted to have this conversation. Going from this diskette model to running the SQL engine across all these different things in different ways is a pretty amazing story. These are the different tools, of course, that are common. A lot of people don't know that Azure Data Studio I showed you, by the way, is native to Linux, Mac, and Windows. So if you're a Mac developer listening right now and saying, I don't want to run any Windows software on my MacBook, no problem. Go do a search for Bob Ward SQL Mac Challenge. And I show you how to run containers for SQL Server with Azure Data Studio on Mac, and no Windows software is required. And you can be up and running with SQL for free because it's a developer edition on an Ubuntu container. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So it looks like we need to bring you back with, as you have many more amazing demos and content with you.
Yeah, it's probably crazy. I probably could be doing this for hours, and your audience is like, come back, come back. Like, we should go pick one of these topics next time and we'll dive deeper, right? We could go do containers or something like that, right?
Yeah, that would be great, because when I see you have only one slide, we are almost time. We are 55 minutes and we are just on one slide. Wow.
That's why I only picked one slide today.
Oh my goodness, that's pretty cool. Yeah. So there's okay. So I just picked one question. I think it's from our early conversation that the guy asked, and I just put it into the say. It says, moments back you said connected, disconnected, or hybrid. What do you mean?
That's a fair question. So let's talk about Azure Edge, about the connected, disconnected scenario. So you could have an IoT device that has internet properties, right? Has networking and could be connected to the internet. But imagine where that IoT device had to execute or live somewhere where it's not connected to the internet, but you still need to do processing on it. So you could connect it, download whatever you need, do processing, connect it back, and then you're doing things. I kind of call that a disconnected or semi-connected scenario. Azure Arc has the same scenario, right? You could be running Azure Arc in a Kubernetes cluster in your data center, but in that scenario, it's not always connected to the internet, to Azure, to the public cloud. So in that case, you could be connected once, download what you need, run what you need, connect in a infrequent fashion to upload whatever you wanted to the cloud or connect to the cloud. So that's kind of what we call this hybrid scenario, where you're running some of the time in your data center, but occasionally you're connected to the cloud. Now, you could choose to be always connected if you wanted to, but we're going to offer you the ability to do this in either one of these fashions.
Yeah, and I think one example could that be if there's a ship. I was just reading of the documentary. If there's a ship and
Yeah.
if somewhere in the ocean, they only have access to this satellite internet, which is very expensive. So you want to be hybrid connected. You don't want to be connected every other day, every other moment, maybe once in a day, or maybe like 6 hours in a day. You're storing the data locally, and then you're pushing it to the cloud and making sure all those analyses are coming in. So maybe that scenario could be one too.
We want you to have the ability to run SQL Server and do processing without always being connected to the cloud. That's really the idea.
That's great. That's great. All right, makes sense. So, do we have anything more in these slides? Or are we done?
No, I just wanted to just end with this slide. Boy, isn't this a crazy slide, right? Because I wanted people to have resources. So, like, if you wanted to get started with Azure SQL Edge, you can just go here, AKMS Azure SQL Edge. That's a pointer to like a tutorial, how to get started as a developer. If you want to see like the T-SQL notebook I showed you, if you want a free workshop, and this is all on GitHub, and I'm an open source developer. You can fork this. You can go sell it if you want. I don't care. This is a free set of training to use with SQL 19, and you can use it with a developer edition of SQL or a container or whatever you want to do. Here's how to get started with a container. And then these are the ones I mentioned that Anna and I worked on. Here's the Microsoft Learn link for you to get a free Azure Sandbox. And then we have a GitHub version of it. So like if you want to just use the GitHub version, use it on your own Azure subscription, you can do that as well. And then here are these books that I mentioned. And don't forget that Anna was a co-author for an additional book that came out for Azure SQL for developers. These books here are pretty much, there's no question they're developer oriented. Pro SQL Server on Linux, I've had developers that are Linux developers that don't know SQL that love this, because I even give SQL fundamentals in that book. Like I wrote it for people that are not SQL people and people that are SQL people, right? These two books, SQL 19 Revealed and Azure SQL Reveal, this is more for the SQL community that get SQL, but want to learn how to use the latest version or Azure. But this book is really nice for developers that want to learn Azure SQL Database, and they're new developers to the platform. So we got a lot of stuff out there for you to use. And quite frankly, if you go to AKMS SQL workshops, just aka.ms SQL workshops, it is a complete GitHub repository of free workshop training from Microsoft. Like we don't mince, we just give it to you. Just do what you want on Git. It's all GitHub based. And then one thing I didn't get the list on here is Azure SQL for Beginners. Azure SQL for Beginners is 61 YouTube videos of Anna Hoffman and I going over end-to-end Azure SQL for you. We've had over 120,000 views on this since we've launched it. It's very popular because these videos are like 5-minute in length. So you can watch them anytime you want to and learn. And they even go along with the whole learning path here.
Wow, that's great. So if I need to go ahead, let me if I correct it right, if I need to go ahead and pick any book out of these, and if I'm an expert, I'll go with the left. But if I'm a beginner, I'll start with this bottom right, isn't it?
Kind of, yeah. Like if you're a Linux developer and you want to see SQL in Linux, but you don't know SQL, this is a good book for you. It's a big book. If you're a new developer and you don't know Azure SQL Database, go pick this book right here. If you're an existing SQL Server person and you want to pick up what's latest on SQL or Azure, go to these two over here to the left.
Yeah, so maybe for my choice, it is the bottom right one.
And you might enjoy that, right? Although I will tell you though that this has got a lot of rich information as well. I really go into depths of how to make it perform well. How does availability work? How to deploy things? How does VM work? And then of course I love writing history, the first chapter. And then I was really blessed that Scott Guthrie wrote the foreword of the book.
That's cool. And I think most of the audiences, and since the audience is almost like developers and IT professionals, they would definitely like to go ahead and have a look at the Azure SQL Reveal, because I believe it just covers the entire ecosystem, if I'm not wrong. Is it the entire
Absolutely.
ecosystem?
This is Azure SQL end to end. So like if you need to understand Azure SQL end to end, this is the book for you. So even as a developer, you need to understand how to deploy things, configure things, how does availability work for you, how does security work for you, all that's in the book.
All right, so that was your slide number 2, and we are done with the presentation.
No more presentations. I'll stop presenting now.
That was a lot. That was a lot. We don't need any more presentations now.
Yeah,
all right.
Sure.
One more. I know we're already a couple of minutes over time now with just 2 slides. I'll take one question that's coming from CSharpCorner MEPs, and they says, what operating systems? Or okay, it says, okay, let me reframe it. What devices can we run this Azure IoT Edge? Because when I see,
what was the question again?
On what devices can we run this SQL Server Edge? Because right now I have with me this Arduino and also have this Raspberry Pi, which on devices can
our Azure SQL Edge docs talks about all the different form factors and device forms. So it's supported both with with ARM and Intel devices. It works with both of those. I think the one thing I'd have to double check on is our Android support. I think we'd love to be able to do that. And I'm not sure whether that's something we've actually announced or that we've worked on yet. We see a lot of devices that are Android based, but as far as processors and devices go, we support both ARM and Intel devices.
I mean, if it's ARM, then it covers many devices.
Right. In fact, I think in our docs, we point you to, Azure IoT guys have done a good job of pointing to like a catalog of popular devices out there for different types of IoT scenarios.
Wow, that would be cool. Something
cameras, sensors, drones, whatever you name it, right?
That's good. That's good. I'll ask one final question, Bob, before you leave. Of all these technical questions, right? So we do talk about the entire ecosystem of the SQL, the Azure, your journey. What do you do apart from all this technical stuff? What's your hobbies? How do you spend your
You know what? Besides the fact that, I have to maintain my home here. I have 3 acres of land here in Texas, so I got to go maintain that a little bit. I spent obviously a lot of great time with my lovely wife, Ginger. Both my boys have grown up, so I love to see them from time to time and spend time with them. But I am a massive sports fan. Okay. You name a sport that exists, and I probably love it. Now, it's probably more U.S.-based sport. Like, I'm always coming to India, and they're trying to teach me cricket, but I don't get it, man. Sorry, I don't get it. I would say American football. We're in the heart of American football season, right? So I love football, basketball, baseball, even hockey. I love playing golf. I'm a big advocate to play golf. I enjoy doing that. Love getting the opportunity to the outdoors. So any chance I get to go outdoors, I love that. We're having just incredible weather here in Texas today. I'll probably be outdoors right after this.
That's cool. So we should bring you here to India and get you some cricket gloves and bats.
Maybe I should go to a match. I've never been to a cricket match before.
Yeah, I mean, things are going tough because of this pandemic. Stadiums aren't good.
That'll be down the road maybe at some point, right?
Yeah, sometimes. Definitely, we'll have to bring you here in India, in Delhi. You've already been coming to India for a long time. We'd love to have you back here in India in the CSharpCorner Annual Conference, one of the finest that we do here in North India. That was an amazing session, Bob. To be honest, it was an honor for me to host you for a very senior person like you, right? Someone who's been working at Microsoft for so long, and thank you so much for contributing to the community. And I, Stephen Simon, on behalf of entire CSharpCorner community and its millions of users, would like to thank you for your valuable time and contributing to the community. And we would love to have you back whenever you're available. And I'm counting on you for the SQL conference in 2029.
It was my honor and pleasure. And I hear you're having a conference coming up. Maybe I'll have to be a part of that.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
And this is the final episode of AMA, right? This episode number 27. We will be back in the month of January. Until then, you can tune in on my Azure AI show that I stream every Monday, and we'll see you there. All right, Bob, take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. See you later.